In the heart of a merciless Montana blizzard, a desperate widow with 3 freezing children knocked on a stranger's door, unaware that this act of survival would lead to a family forged by courage and love. In the heart of a relentless Wyoming blizzard, Sarah Caldwell, a widow abandoned by her husband, trudged through snowdrifts with her 3 children, Elijah, Clara, and little Ben, clinging to survival. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, each gust slicing through their threadbare coats as they stumbled forward. The wreckage of their broken wagon left miles behind on the frozen trail near Bitterwind Pass. Sarah's hands, raw and numb, gripped the tattered shawl around her shoulders, a futile shield against the storm's icy wrath. Behind her, Elijah, 12 and trying to be brave, held Clara's hand tightly, her 9-year-old frame shivering under a scarf that did little to warm her blue-tinged lips. Ben, barely 6, staggered in the snow, his small voice lost in the wind as tears froze on his cheeks. They had been walking for hours, maybe days. It was hard to tell in the whiteout that erased all sense of time and direction. Their wagon wheel had shattered, leaving them stranded in a wilderness that cared nothing for their plight. Sarah's husband, Nathan, had vanished a week ago, leaving only a crumpled note and a handful of coins under a tin of flour. Gone west. Start over. You'll manage. His betrayal stung worse than the cold, for he'd known the storm was coming, had seen the dark clouds piling over the mountains, and still chose to abandon them. Sarah's heart ached as she glanced back at her children, their faces pale and drawn, each step a battle against the snow that reached their knees. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Just a little farther. But the truth was, she didn't know if they were even on a trail anymore. The landmarks were buried, the world a featureless sea of white. Then, through the storm's fury, a faint glow flickered in the distance, a lantern's promise of shelter, and maybe, just maybe, salvation. Sarah's legs burned with exhaustion as she half-carried Ben, his small body trembling against her. Elijah and Clara clung to her coat, their steps faltering in the deepening snow. The lantern's glow grew stronger, revealing the dark outline of a cabin nestled among pines, its sturdy logs defiant against the storm. Sarah's heart pounded with a mix of hope and fear. Out here, a stranger could be savior or threat. With no choice left, she staggered to the door and pounded with her frozen fist, her voice a hoarse rasp. "Please, we have children." For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then came the scrape of boots, the creak of a bolt, and the door swung open. A man loomed in the frame, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face framed by a dark beard and eyes sharp as flint. His clothes, patched but clean, spoke of a life carved from the frontier. He scanned Sarah and her children, his gaze unreadable but not unkind, taking in their frostbitten faces and shivering forms. Without a word, he stepped aside. Inside. Now. Sarah stumbled across the threshold, the warmth of the cabin hitting her like a wave. The children pressed close, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from deadly cold to the glow of a stone fireplace. The man, John Harrow, he later said, slammed the door against the blizzard and barred it with practiced ease. "Sit by the fire," he ordered, dragging chairs closer to the flames. From a cedar chest, he pulled heavy wool blankets, draping them over the children's shoulders. Ben sobbed softly, burying his face in Sarah's side, while Elijah and Clara stared wide-eyed at their rescuer. John moved with quiet efficiency, fetching a kettle and tin cups from a side room. "Drink this," he said, pouring steaming tea that smelled of herbs and honey. "It'll warm you." Sarah's numb fingers curled around the cup, her eyes studying the man who'd saved them. His cabin was simple but orderly, tools neatly hung, a shelf of books catching her eye. This was a man who thrived alone, yet here he was, offering sanctuary to strangers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm Sarah Caldwell. These are my children, Elijah, Clara, Ben." John nodded, his expression guarded. "John Harrow. How far'd you come?" "Since dawn," Sarah replied. "Wagon broke near Bitterwind Pass." His eyes narrowed, calculating the impossibility of their journey through the storm. "You're lucky you made it." Sarah met his gaze, her children sipping their tea in grateful silence. She didn't feel lucky, not yet, but in this moment, with the fire's warmth seeping into their bones, she dared to hope they might survive the night. As the fire crackled, filling the cabin with a warmth that seemed to thaw the very air, Sarah watched her children begin to relax. Elijah's shoulders, tense with the weight of trying to be the man of the family, eased slightly as he sipped the bitter tea. Clara's blue lips regained a hint of color, her small hands clutching the blanket John had given her. Ben, curled against Sarah, stopped shivering, his sobs fading into soft hiccups. The cabin, though sparse, felt like a fortress against the storm raging outside, its walls groaning but unyielding under the wind's assault. John Harrow moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced the wilderness and won. He stoked the fire, adding logs with practiced care, then pulled a loaf of coarse bread and a slab of salted venison from a wooden box. "Not much," he said, slicing the meat with a hunting knife, "but it'll fill you." Sarah tried to protest, but her stomach growled, betraying her hunger. They hadn't eaten since the previous morning, and the children's eyes followed the food with desperate hope. John set out 10 plates, his movements deliberate, as if accustomed to rationing for one. "Eat slow," he advised. "Too fast, and you'll regret it." Sarah broke the bread into pieces, handing them to her children first. Elijah hesitated, glancing at John as if expecting a catch, but the man only nodded, his dark eyes softening just a fraction. "Go on, boy." Elijah took a bite, and Clara and Ben followed, their faces lighting with the simple relief of food and warmth. Sarah ate sparingly, her mind racing. She didn't know this man, didn't know if his kindness came with a price. The frontier was full of stories, some of generosity, others of danger disguised as help. But as she watched John check the shutters against the storm, she saw no malice in his actions, only a solitary man adapting to unexpected company. "Why do you live out here alone?" Clara asked suddenly, her voice small but clear. John paused, his knife still over the venison. "Quiet suits me," he said after a moment. "Fewer complications." Sarah caught the weight behind his words, a hint of a past he didn't share. She understood. Her own past with Nathan was a wound she wasn't ready to open either. "We won't stay long," she said quietly. "Just until the storm passes." John looked at her, his gaze steady. "Storm's not passing anytime soon. Looks like a week, maybe more. You're here until it's safe." His tone left no room for argument. Sarah nodded, a mix of gratitude and unease settling in her chest. They were safe for now, but the storm outside wasn't the only threat. Nathan's betrayal lingered like a shadow, and she wondered how long this fragile sanctuary could last. The storm raged on, sealing Sarah and her children inside John Harrow's cabin for days that blurred into a strange rhythm of survival and tentative trust. By the third morning, the snow had piled against the windows, dimming the light but not the warmth of the fire John kept burning. Sarah woke to find her children already stirring, their faces less gaunt, their eyes brighter with the resilience of youth. The cabin, once a stranger's domain, began to feel like a refuge, its sturdy walls a testament to John's solitary craftsmanship. John proved to be more than a gruff loner. He spoke little but acted with purpose, teaching Elijah how to split kindling with a small axe, showing Clara how to mend a torn shirt from his pile of neglected sewing, and carving a crude wooden horse for Ben, whose giggles filled the cabin with a warmth Sarah hadn't heard in weeks. "You're good with them," she said one evening, as John handed Clara a book from his shelf, a weathered copy of Robinson Crusoe. He shrugged, his eyes on the fire. "Kids deserve better than being scared all the time." Sarah watched him closely, noting the care in his movements, the way he listened to her children's questions with a patience Nathan had never shown. Elijah, usually guarded, began to shadow John, asking about snares and tracking. Clara, shy at first, read aloud to Ben, her confidence growing under John's quiet encouragement. Sarah herself found purpose in the cabin's chores, cooking simple meals of beans and cornbread, mending John's clothes with a skill honed over years of making do. Each task shared, each small conversation wove a fragile bond between them, like threads stitching a wound. Yet, Nathan's shadow loomed. Sarah hadn't told John the full story. How Nathan's note wasn't just abandonment, but a calculated cruelty, leaving them with barely enough to survive the winter he knew was coming. She dreaded the moment she'd have to explain, but John didn't press. Instead, he shared his own sparse truths. 15 years alone, a life built from necessity after escaping a past he didn't name. "Why help us?" Sarah asked one night, as the children slept and the fire cast shadows on the walls. John's eyes met hers, steady and unguarded for the first time. "Because no one should die out there when I've got room to spare." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled in Sarah's chest. Outside, the blizzard howled, but inside, something softer was taking root, a sense of safety, of possibility, that felt both foreign and precious. Sarah didn't know how long they could stay, but for the first time since Nathan's betrayal, she began to believe they might not just survive, but live. A week into their stay, the storm's fury began to wane, replaced by an eerie silence that blanketed the Wyoming wilderness. Sarah woke to the absence of the wind's howl, the world outside still and crystalline under a fresh layer of snow. John was already at the window, his silhouette stark against the pale light filtering through the frosted glass. "Storm's breaking," he said without turning. "Trails might be clear in a day or two." Sarah's heart sank, though she tried to hide it. The end of the storm meant they could move on, perhaps to her sister in Cheyenne, but it also meant leaving the fragile haven they'd found. The thought of uprooting her children again, of facing the world without John's quiet strength, felt like a new kind of loss. "That's good," she said, her voice betraying her uncertainty. John turned, his dark eyes searching hers. "Is it?" Before she could answer, Elijah clambered down from the sleeping loft, his face alight with excitement. "Can we go outside, Mr. Harrow? I want to see the snow." John's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "After breakfast. Stay close, though. Snow's tricky, looks solid, but it can hide trouble." His words carried a weight Sarah felt in her bones, a reminder that safety was fleeting in this wild land. Breakfast was simple, cornmeal mush and dried apples, but it felt like a feast after days of scarcity. As they ate, Sarah studied the cabin in the morning light. It was larger than she'd first thought, with a loft for sleeping and a main room that felt spacious despite its simplicity. John had built it himself, he'd said, over 2 summers, and every detail spoke of care. The polished floor, the neatly stacked firewood, the small shelf of books that hinted at a mind as sharp as his survival skills. "It's a fine home," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "You must be proud." John stirred his mush, his expression unreadable. "It's a roof. Keeps the cold out. Never needed more than that." But his glance toward the children, laughing as Ben tried to balance a spoon on his nose, suggested otherwise. Sarah saw it, the way his solitude was softening, the way her children's presence filled a space he hadn't known was empty. The day passed in quiet industry. John took Elijah outside to check the snow's depth, teaching him to spot hidden dips. Clara helped Sarah mend a pair of John's trousers, her small fingers quick with a needle. Ben trailed John like a shadow, clutching his wooden horse and asking endless questions about mountain lions and wolves. John answered each one seriously, his patience drawing a rare smile from Sarah. "You're a natural teacher," she said as they prepared supper, a stew of rabbit and root vegetables from John's stores. He shrugged, but his eyes met hers, holding a warmth she hadn't noticed before. "They're good kids. Make it easy." Sarah felt a flush creep up her neck, a stirring she hadn't expected. She pushed it down, focusing on the stew, but the feeling lingered, a spark of something new, kindled in the shared work and quiet moments. That evening, as the children slept, Sarah and John sat by the fire. The silence was comfortable, but heavy with unspoken questions. "What's your plan when the trail's open?" John asked, his voice low. Sarah hesitated, Nathan's note burning in her mind. "Cheyenne, maybe. My sister's there." But she trailed off, unsure how to voice the fear that leaving meant losing this unexpected refuge. John leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You don't have to decide tonight, but you've got a place here as long as you need it." His words were steady, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. Outside, the stars glittered like ice, but inside, the cabin glowed with the promise of something more. A family, perhaps, forged not by blood but by choice. Morning after the storm cleared, Sarah stood on the cabin's porch, watching her children tumble into the snow with shrieks of joy. The world outside was a dazzling expanse of white, the drifts piled high against the cabin's north wall, while the south side remained clear under John's well-designed overhang. Elijah tossed snowballs at Clara, who laughed and ducked, while Ben flopped onto his back, waving his arms to make a snow angel. Their voices broke the mountain silence, a sound so pure it made Sarah's chest ache with gratitude. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her breath clouding in the crisp air. "Beautiful and deadly," John said, joining her on the porch, his rifle resting casually against the wall. "Snow like this can hide crevasses, weak ice. Gotta know where to step." His words were practical, but his gaze lingered on the children, a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Sarah followed his look, her heart swelling at the sight of her children playing, free from the fear that had haunted them since Nathan's abandonment. Then, a distant sound shattered the moment, the crunch of hooves on packed snow. Sarah's breath caught as a lone rider appeared on the trail, a dark figure against the blinding white. Her stomach twisted with dread as she recognized the slope of his shoulders, the arrogant tilt of his hat. "John," she whispered, her voice tight. "It's Nathan." John's jaw tightened, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle. "Children, inside," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "Now." Elijah hesitated, his eyes narrowing at the approaching rider, but Clara grabbed Ben's hand and pulled him toward the door. Sarah herded them inside, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and fear. Through the cabin's window, she watched Nathan ride into the clearing, his posture radiating confidence, as if he hadn't left his family to freeze a week ago. He looked well-fed, his coat new, his horse sleek, a stark contrast to the desperation he'd left them in. John stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, but held low. "You're on my land, Caldwell," he called, his voice steady. "State your business." Nathan dismounted with a practiced ease, his smile sharp and calculating. "Looking for my wife and children," he said, his tone falsely genial. "Heard they got caught in the storm. Figured they might have ended up here." Sarah's blood boiled. She stepped onto the porch, her children peering anxiously from the doorway. "You left us, Nathan," she said, her voice cutting through the cold air. "Left us with nothing but a note and a few coins, knowing the storm was coming." Nathan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Now, Sarah, that's no way to talk to your husband. I was setting up a new life for us out west. You were supposed to wait." "Wait." Sarah's voice rose, sharp with indignation. "Wait to starve? To freeze? You abandoned us." Nathan's mask slipped, a flash of anger crossing his face. "I'm here now, ain't I? I've got rights to my family, and I mean to take you back." He took a step forward, but John moved to block him, his rifle still low but ready. "You've got no rights here," John said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that made Nathan pause. "Not after what you did." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, her children's fearful eyes burning into her. Nathan's return wasn't just a threat to their safety. It was a challenge to the fragile hope they'd built in this cabin. She met John's gaze, seeing the resolve there, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Nathan's eyes darted between Sarah and John, his confident facade cracking under the weight of their defiance. "You think you can keep my family from me?" he snarled, his hand twitching toward the revolver at his hip. "I've got a court order from Judge Grayson in Laramie. Says those kids are mine, and Sarah's still my wife. Law's on my side." Sarah's stomach dropped. She hadn't anticipated Nathan moving so quickly, leveraging the law to reclaim what he'd discarded. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "The law doesn't care about the note you left, Nathan, or how you abandoned us to die in a blizzard. You think a piece of paper makes you a father? A husband?" Nathan's face reddened, his voice rising. "Don't lecture me, woman. You're mine, and so are they. You don't get to run off with some mountain hermit and playhouse." He took another step, but John raised his rifle slightly, the motion calm but deliberate. "Take another step, Caldwell, and you'll regret it," John said, his voice low and cold as the Wyoming wind. Nathan froze, his hand hovering near his gun, weighing his odds. "Enough." A new voice cut through the tension, sharp and authoritative. From the trail, a group of riders emerged. Neighbors from Pine Hollow, led by Ellen Carver, the no-nonsense owner of the town's boarding house. Behind her rode Doc Harlan, Reverend Tate, and a handful of others, their faces grim but resolute. Ellen's horse stopped beside Nathan, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Morning, Sheriff," she called, though her gaze stayed on Nathan. "Seems we've got a situation here." Sheriff Amos Reed, who'd ridden up unnoticed behind Nathan, dismounted slowly, his badge glinting in the pale sunlight. "Got word of trouble," he said, his voice measured. "Caldwell, you say you've got a court order?" Nathan smirked, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Signed by Judge Grayson himself. These are my kids, and I'm taking them." Sarah's heart raced as she glanced at John, whose expression remained unreadable but firm. She stepped closer to the sheriff, her voice steady. "He left us, Sheriff. Left us to die with nothing but a note and a few coins. If John hadn't taken us in, we'd be dead." Elijah, standing in the doorway, added, "He didn't care about us then. Why should he get us now?" The sheriff studied the paper, then looked at Nathan, his eyes narrowing. "Judge Grayson's orders don't carry much weight these days. Word is he's been taking bribes to settle custody disputes. Might want to explain that, Caldwell." Nathan's smirk faltered, his eyes darting to the crowd. Ellen spoke up, her voice sharp. "Folks in Pine Hollow don't take kindly to men who abandon their families, then come crawling back with bought papers. We're here to make sure justice gets done." Doc Harlan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "These kids have been through hell, Sheriff. Forcing them back with a man who left them to freeze could break them. I've seen it before. Trauma like that doesn't heal easy." Reverend Tate nodded, quoting softly, "Whoso shall offend one of these little ones, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck." "Nathan, your actions speak louder than any court order." Nathan's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. I've got rights." But the sheriff raised a hand, silencing him. "Rights come with responsibilities, Caldwell. You failed yours. These folks are witnesses to that." He turned to Sarah, his expression softening. "Mrs. Caldwell, what do your children want?" Sarah looked back at Elijah, Clara, and Ben, their faces a mix of fear and determination. "Tell the sheriff," she said gently. Elijah stepped forward, his voice clear. "We want to stay with Ma and Mr. Harrow. He saved us. He cares." Clara nodded, clutching Ben's hand. "Papa was cruel. Mr. Harrow's kind." Ben's small voice added, "He made me a horse. Papa never did." The sheriff nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to Nathan. "Seems clear to me. You can take your paper and go, or we can have a longer talk in town about Judge Grayson's dealings." Nathan's shoulders slumped, his bravado crumbling as he faced the united front of the community. With a final glare at Sarah, he mounted his horse and rode off, the snow crunching under his retreat. Sarah exhaled, her legs trembling as she leaned against John. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "It's not over. He'll try again." Sarah nodded, but as she looked at her children and the neighbors who'd ridden to their defense, she felt a strength she hadn't known she had. "Let him try," she said. "We're not alone anymore." 2 days later, as the sun broke over the Wyoming peaks, a new rider approached the cabin, a U.S. Marshal named Thomas Kane, his badge gleaming with authority. Sarah's heart clenched, fearing Nathan's return with a stronger claim. But Kane's demeanor was calm, his eyes kind. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, tipping his hat, "I'm here about your husband's so-called court order." He dismounted, producing a letter sealed with an official stamp. Judge Grayson's been removed from the bench. Evidence of fraud and bribery, linked to men like Nathan Caldwell. That order's null and void. Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief. What does that mean for us? She asked, her voice trembling. Kane's gaze softened as he glanced at the children, who stood close to John, watching warily. It means you're free to choose your path, ma'am. Nathan's wanted for questioning in Laramie, land scams, mostly. He won't be troubling you again soon. The marshal's words sank in, a weight lifting from Sarah's shoulders. She looked at John, who stood quietly, his rifle propped against the porch rail. The children clung to her, their faces bright with hope. Thank you, Marshal, she said, her voice steady now. We found a home here. Kane nodded, a faint smile breaking through his stern facade. Looks like a fine one. I'll let the folks in Pine Hollow know you're safe. With a tip of his hat, he rode off, leaving the cabin bathed in the golden light of a new day. That evening, Sarah and John sat with the children by the fire, the cabin filled with the warmth of shared laughter and the smell of fresh cornbread. Sarah had made her choice. She would stay, not just out of necessity, but because the bond they'd forged felt stronger than any she'd known. John, she said quietly, as Elijah read to Clara and Ben, I don't want to go to Cheyenne. This is where we belong. John's eyes met hers, a rare smile softening his weathered face. Then stay, he said simply. There's room for all of you. His words were a vow, unspoken but clear, and Sarah felt her heart settle, the fear of Nathan's shadow finally fading. A year later, the cabin had grown, a new room for the children, a garden blooming with Sarah's careful tending. John and Sarah had married in a quiet ceremony in Pine Hollow, with Ellen Carver and Reverend Tate as witnesses, the community celebrating their union with a warmth that rivaled the summer sun. John formally adopted Elijah, Clara, and Ben, giving them his name and a father's steadfast care. Nathan, true to the marshal's word, had been arrested in Laramie, his schemes unraveling under the weight of his own greed. As Sarah stood on the porch, her hand resting on her swelling belly, she watched John teach Elijah to saddle a horse while Clara and Ben chased each other through the wildflowers. The Wyoming sky stretched wide above, clear and endless, a far cry from the blizzard that had brought them together. This was no longer just a refuge. It was a home built on courage, love, and the unyielding support of a community that had stood by them. Sarah smiled, her heart full, knowing they'd weathered the storm and found their forever in its wake.